Snow soft the edges of Northbridge that Christmas Eve. The kind of snow that made stoplights look like floating lanterns and turned the cracked steps of the Northbridge Commons into something gentle. Inside, the community center hummed coat drives, soup lines, quiet greetings, while outside a black sedan idled, exhaust fogging the air like a dragon, trying not to breathe too loudly. "Sir, could you hold me for a moment?" Graham Arthur Whitaker, whose net worth and calendar both made people whisper, turned toward the small voice. A little black girl, 7 at most, stood under a halo of snow, braids tucked beneath a knit hat that slouched to one side. Her coat was a faded bubblegum pink, zipper out, edges frayed. She held herself still, chin up, eyes wide and steady, as if gravity worked differently for her. "What did you say?" he asked, caught between the limo's warmth and the sharpened cold. "Could you hold me just for a moment?" She repeated, softer, like a secret trying not to echo. Graham's assistant, Mara, unflappable, perpetually 3 steps ahead, was already murmuring into her phone. "He's running 5 minutes behind." "No, 10. The driver can circle." "Don't yes. I know it's snowing." Graham knelt so they were eye to eye. He planned to be here for 15 minutes. Smile. Hand off a turkey. Shake hands with 2 volunteers whose names he'd practice remembered. An optic stop. But the girl's gaze cut through his choreography like a bell tone. "What's your name?" he asked. "Zuri," she said, a tremor in her voice but none in her stare. "Where's your family, Zuri?" "My Nana's inside. She's not feeling good. We came for the food drive." She glanced at the doors, then back at him. "I saw you hug that boy when he fell." "You helped him up." "You hugged him." He remembered vaguely. A skinned knee, the weight of a small body clinging longer than a camera flash. Muscle memory. Then back to the plan. "If my dad were still alive," Zuri whispered, "I think he'd hug me like that." The words found the hollowed-out place he walled off since the accident and took a chair there like they'd been invited. Behind him, Mara said, "We're really off schedule," and a photographer in a hat with a foam reindeer antler lifted his camera. But the world narrowed to the girl and the snow and the old ache. He opened his arms. She stepped into them without hesitation. For a heartbeat he froze, fear, reputation, the person he'd curated. Then he set those down and let his arms circle her. She was all bones and winter and heartbeat, quick as a sparrow. Snow fell quietly, like it was minding its business. The line at the door shifted. Somewhere a kettle screamed and someone hushed it. In that small circle of warmth, something in Graham softened, and for the first time in years, he could feel his heart as something other than a metronome. "Thank you," Zuri said when she stepped back. "You're welcome," he said, voice cracked like an old record. "Would you like to introduce me to your Nana?" She led him through the Commons Hall posters taped to cinder block, GED classes, jazz night, coats here, to a makeshift gym where volunteers moved like a well-practiced song. In the corner sat an older black woman in a chair, blanket around her shoulders, dignity pressed like a crease into everything she wore. "Nana, this is Mr. Graham," Zuri announced. He gave me a hug. "I hope she didn't bother you," the woman said as she stood, voice warm but guarded. "I'm Loretta Ellis." "She didn't," he said. "She reminded me of something I forgot I needed." Loretta's tired eyes brightened a fraction. "That child's more heart than most people twice her age." "Are you both headed home?" Graham asked. "We take the bus." A soft cough caught in Loretta's chest. Couple stops. "It's Christmas Eve," he said before thinking it through. "Let me take you, and dinner, please." "Oh, no, we couldn't." "You can," he interrupted gently, surprising himself with how certain he sounded. "You're not a project. You're people." "It would be my honor." Zuri's smile wasn't fireworks. It was sunrise quiet, inevitable. The Orbit Diner at Belmont and Ninth was an old chrome ship with fogged windows and a peppermint sign that spun like it was built on stubbornness. Graham had eaten there 20 years ago, when he'd still known how to be spontaneous. Pancakes at midnight, a bad decision to drive to the lake in the rain. Now the booths were patched, the laminate worn smooth by decades of elbows and coffee mugs. A server in a reindeer pin met them with a nod. Back booths warm. Loretta eyed the menu prices, mouth thinning. Graham caught the glance. Please get whatever you like. Soup is plenty, she tried. 3 roast beef dinners, Graham told the server, mashed potatoes, green beans, cornbread, and pumpkin pie for dessert, please. He looked at Zuri. It's Christmas Eve. That's when you eat too much. Are you really rich? Zuri asked, not curious so much as confirming the rules of the game. I am, he smiled. But the richest things don't take money. Like hugs, Zuri said. Like hugs, he said, pain and truth braided together in his chest. They ate without urgency. Loretta murmured a blessing that caught on the word protect. Zuri tasted everything like a child, writing down a list of firsts. In the quiet between bites, the clatter of the diner sounded like a kind of safety. Graham remembered roast beef on a Sunday that smelled like life, and the car that didn't stop, and the week afterward when silence bled into everything. He steadied his breath. Zuri munched her cornbread like a small and grateful machine. Why are you doing this? Loretta asked finally, eyes on him, no begging, no flattery. Just the steel of a woman who had survived a system and didn't I owe it a smile. Because I built a wall so high I forgot what air tasted like, he said. Because your granddaughter asked to matter. I remembered what human feels like. Loretta watched him. Words like that don't mean much where we live. Then let me prove them, he said. One step at a time, one dinner at a time. Okay then, she said slowly. One step. They drove through Kensington Flats and its collateral beauty. Candy cane lights in windows. A snowman with a missing eye, a broken tricycle imprisoned in a railing of frost. Zuri fell asleep against Loretta's arm in the way of children who finally let their bodies have the truth. They climbed 3 flights because the elevator had retired last winter with an unceremonious thunk. Inside the apartment, 1 bedroom, a kitchen that was really an idea. A bathroom that did its best. There were crocheted doilies and framed photos, old saints on new walls. Zuri produced a sugar cookie shaped like a snowman from a tin hidden under the couch. We were saving it, but we can share. Graham took it like he'd been handed a medal. He looked around, noticing the things that didn't complain but still told the truth. The radiator that hissed like it had opinions. The crack like a lightning bolt down the ceiling. The thinness in Loretta's cough that made him imagine a lung with an eviction notice. I meant what I said, he told Loretta, as Zuri drew at the coffee table with a fistful of crayons. I want to help. We're not a Christmas headline, she said. And I'm not a savior, he replied, just a neighbor with resources. Zuri looked up, pencil hovering. If you had a daughter, would that make you a dad? He blinked. I did. Her name was Avery. The name was a soft glass that cut anyway. She was 11. Zuri's gaze didn't flinch. Are you still a dad if she's gone? Yes, he said, the word arriving like a confession that forgave him. Always. Then maybe, Zuri said, you could be a little bit of a dad to me too. Loretta inhaled as if the room had tilted. Graham did not. Something inside him clicked, the sound of an old lock learning it still knew how to turn. He took Zuri's small hand in both of his. I would be honored. When he left that night, he carried the snowman cookie like it was fragile and ridiculous and holy. In the car, the city glittered with a beauty that wasn't trying to impress him. He told the driver to just drive. He needed a moving view. The morning after was a slate gray hush. Graham sat in his penthouse robe, staring at a plate with eggs and smoked salmon, unmoved by the way money arranged itself on porcelain. Mara stood with her tablet the way a lighthouse stands with light. Firm at 10, she recited. Lunch with the board. Then end of year donors. I'm not going, he said without looking up, to any of it. Is this about the girl? She asked, voice neutral, eyes bright. Her name is Zuri, he said, and just saying it felt like the smallest, bravest rebellion. Mara tilted her head, listening like only someone who'd kept him alive in 12 disasters could. What do you need? A unit within 5 blocks of Kensington Flats. 2 bedrooms, elevator, heat that works. Today, she blinked once. Say less. She didn't ask why the radius was 5 blocks. Mara understood neighborhoods were not dots on a map. They were delicate ecosystems, and moving a child across invisible borders could feel like exile. By 4 p.m., key in hand, he stood in 4C in a building that had the audacity to be warm in winter. New laminate, double-glazed windows, vague that hummed like a lullaby. He touched the wall, still surprised to discover that some structures held. By 5, he knocked on Loretta's door and led them through a dusk of snow to 4C, where a small artificial tree waited with lights like a careful promise, and the pantry didn't echo when you opened it. Zuri ran room to room like gravity had new rules. Loretta stood still, fingers on the countertop, eyes filling and not apologizing for it. Why? She asked, quiet but pointed. Why this? Because when Zuri asked me to hold her, he said, she asked me to hold the truth. Safety shouldn't be rare. Loretta nodded once, the nod of a general who will accept reinforcements but still run the line. Will accept, on one condition. What is it? He asked. You visit, she said, not as a donor, as family. Deal, he said, a smile sneaking out before he could strangle it with brand management. Word did what it does in neighborhoods like Kensington. It vaulted barbershops and laundromats and the Orbit Diner as counter. The version changed in the telling. He bought a whole building. He moved her into a penthouse. He starting a cult but with blankets, but the hum was the same. Something unusual was happening, and for once, it didn't have teeth. Mara arranged movers who looked like linebackers and handled doilies like they were parchment. She sourced a bunk bed that could be separated later for when opinions develop, and a rug whose pattern looked like confetti that had decided to be permanent. Zuri watched the unboxing with the solemnity of a museum docent. Do you want the top bunk? Graham asked. Zuri considered the ceiling, which wore its new paint like a fresh start. I want the window, she said. They pushed the bed so the window would be the first thing morning could hand her. Loretta supervised the kitchen with the ease of a woman who had cooked miracles on less. She stacked spices like soldiers, paprika, thyme, garlic powder, then frowned at the space where a small stock pot should be. I'll get it, Graham said. You don't know what kind to buy, she said. He grinned. That's why you're coming with me. They walked to Dom's Hardware and home on the corner, where the bell on the door insisted on ringing like an enthusiastic witness. Dom himself had shoulders like a shed and a mustache that could call a committee to order. He looked at Graham, then at Loretta, then at Zuri's coat, new and defiant and still learning her shape. What can I do for you? He asked. We're outfitting a kitchen, Loretta said. Dom gestured broadly. Praise be. They chose a stock pot that felt like legacy, a skillet heavy enough to be faithful, a set of bowls and blues and greens that reminded Zuri of lakes she'd only drawn. Graham reached for a toaster oven. Loretta tapped his hand. You don't need the Cadillac to toast bread, she said. They left with a good toaster and a laughter that made the bell work extra. Back in 4C, Loretta unpacked the stock pot like it had been passed down. She ran water, listening to the steady, not angry rush. Heat that works, she murmured, not to anyone, not exactly. Zuri drew the new kitchen on a page she labeled Evidence. She drew the stock pot and the steam like music notes. She drew the window as an open eye. She drew 3 people who looked like they'd been plucked from separate stories and written into the same sentence. At Whitaker and Bell, the firm he built from spit and stubbornness, the board frowned with the synchronized elegance of people who had practiced looking serious. They were perched around a table so sleek it reflected their skepticism. Mara had already slid a dossier to each setting cream cardstock, Star Lantern Project, embossed modestly across the top. Inside were proposed pilot programs, timeline budget, and a set of photographs of Northbridge taken by a local high schooler, steam from manholes like the city. Exhaling a mural of a woman whose hair was a constellation map, a little boy in a neon hat asleep on a bus seat. Zuri's lighthouse sketch was the appendix. Visibility? One board member asked as if kindness needed a camera. No, Graham said. Vision. Another tapped the spreadsheet. We've given away before, Graham. It led to questions we didn't like answering. We didn't like answering because we had no answers, Graham said. I'm not interested in sprinkling cash like confetti. This is architecting trust. An older member cleared his throat. And if it fails, then it fails, Mara said. We'll publish the postmortem and pay for someone smarter to try again. She folded her hands. But we won't not try because we're afraid to look mortal. Silence did what it does when truth is concise. They signed off because they had learned the hard way that Graham ignored them when it mattered, and because Mara could stare a person into yes. As the meeting adjourned, one of the younger members, a woman with a sharp bob and a softer conscience than the table deserved, slid her card to Mara. If you do this right, she murmured, I'll convince my family's foundation to follow. Mara nodded. We are allergic to performative philanthropy, she said. Prepare accordingly. Zuri's first day at Harborview Elementary thrummed with fluorescent echoes and the waxy smell of hallway polish. She carried a backpack that hadn't yet learned her shoulder. Her teacher, Ms. Dorsey, greeted her with the warmth of someone who had chosen teaching over wealth on purpose. We're glad you're here, she said. It sounded like a sentence that had been waiting for Zuri. Zuri chose a seat near the windows. Outside, a playground held its breath under crusted snow. Ms. Dorsey taped Zuri's name to a cubby with careful letters. We have a routine, she said, but routines are just dances. We can teach the steps. In the cafeteria, Zuri sat alone by choice, not because no one invited her, but because the noise tilted the world and she needed a corner. She unfolded a napkin from her lunchbox to find Loretta's note. Smile at least 3 times today. Keeps, I'm guessing. She smiled once at a passing lunchade whose bracelets made small, approving music. Twice at the girl across the table whose hair barrettes resembled butterflies that had decided to stay. She saved the 3rd smile like a good piece of candy. After school, she tried to slip out the side door to avoid the cluster of parents who always made her feel like an unsolved math problem. At the bike rack, 3 5th graders orbiting cool like moths found her anyway. What's it like having a rich white dude by your life? One asked, his puff jacket making him look like a berry and a threat. He didn't buy anything, Zuri said, steady. That you got a fridge full of pizza, another said. Leave her alone, said a voice that arrived like a slingshot pebble. It was Jamal from her class, ears that stuck out like parentheses and a stubborn jaw. He looked terrified and didn't move. Back off, he said, which made the boys laugh and then decide to be bored somewhere else. They walked away with the peculiar swagger of small tyrants who knew they weren't that dangerous. Thanks, Zuri said. You drew me, he said, half complaint, half brag. In your sketchbook? You were the only person who didn't look at me like I was made of glass, she said. He grinned, embarrassed, and that was the start of a friendship that felt less like fireworks and more like a footbridge, dependable, there when it rained. Meanwhile, the city did what cities do. It tried to have an opinion about a story it hadn't finished reading. Councilman Victor Penhair that tried too hard, Smile that didn't decide to be offended on behalf of the Republic. He asked loud questions about unchecked philanthropy and private influence, which sounded a lot like someone else's getting credit. He'd built his career on hearings that produced more footage than results. Anonymous complaints about Loretta's guardianship jumped to CPS like sparks to dry grass. The knock on Loretta's new door came on a Thursday afternoon. The woman on the other side wore a long coat and the careful smile of someone who might be the good guy, but wasn't too sure. Child Protective Services, she said, badge out. We need to discuss some concerns. Zuri's at school, Loretta said, and she is safe. We're required to conduct a welfare check. You can conduct all the checks you want, Loretta replied, voice iron. You can also explain to me why the system that forgot us for years suddenly remembered because a man did what you didn't to. The worker's mouth tightened, not in offense, in recognition. May I come in? You can look, Loretta said, stepping aside. But you will see what you will. A child's drawings, a fridge that hums, a bed that invites sleep, and a guardian who loves that child with her whole spine. The worker did see all those things. She also saw the pill organizer on the counter and the inhaler near the sink. She saw the small satin pouch on the nightstand with the words "Be still" sewn in thread, the color of old honey. She took notes as if notes could carry tenderness. Is there support? She asked, eyes flicking toward the inhaler. Community, Loretta said. Church, neighbors. The man you're thinking of like a headline. He brings casseroles like a rookie and listens like a good student. He is not the savior in this story. She folded her arms. Zuri is. The worker nodded. We'll be in touch. I'll be here, Loretta said. I have been. At the Star Lantern office, a rented floor above a bakery that made the hall smell like a hug, Mara slid a printout to Graham. Penn's office initiated the complaint. Paper trails clumsy. He thinks interns make him invisible. He's using a child, Graham said, anger careful and cold. Then we stop him, Mara replied. Also, the mayor's office called. Mayor Marino? She's curious, Mara said, not hostile. That's the best kind. The press conference was unglamorous. A room with bad lighting and microphones that had seen things. Graham stood behind the podium and put his grief on a plate. Years ago, I started a foundation in my daughter's name. After she died, I collapsed. The foundation collapsed with me. It wasn't corruption, it was heartbreak. He leaned into the mic. If you want to call that failure, fine. But don't weaponize my grief to hurt a child. Don't pretend compassion is corruption because it makes for a headline. The clip played on local stations between weather and sports and traveled farther than anyone predicted, carried on the algorithm's inexplicable wind. Loretta watched with a hand on her throat. Zuri sat cross-legged on the rug, eyes wide, the way a child listens when a grown-up tells the truth and the truth doesn't need makeup. Mayor Lila Marino, sharp-eyed, patient, opened an ethics review on Penn's tactics and said on camera, "We cannot let cynicism decide which children deserve safety." It sounded like a line practiced in a mirror and then softened by belief. Penn snarled and tried another angle. Leaks appeared. A yellow dossier about the collapsed Avery Whitaker Fund. Insinuations about tax shelters from a decade ago. It didn't hit because Graham had already said the quiet part out loud. And because Mara released the documents to the press first, with a statement that read, in her signature minimalism, "We made mistakes, we learned, now watch." Still, the pushback hurt. Jamal's uncle told him to keep his distance. A teacher suggested Zuri tone down the attention. Some nights, Loretta pressed a hand to her chest and counted the number of breaths that felt easy. Graham stood on his balcony more than he slept, that old ache a familiar chair. On one of those nights, an envelope slid under Loretta's door for the artist in you. Inside, a thick sketchbook and a note on crisp paper. Fill this with every dream. Zuri set it on her pillow like a talisman and began to draw the city, not as it was, but as it might forgive itself into being. She drew a courthouse where the gavel was a paintbrush. She drew a library whose doors never locked and whose windows watched anyone who tried to make them. She drew a bridge high and strong and full of people not falling. Graham brought Reverend Abel Ruiz into the fold because there are fights money starts and fights the soul finishes. Ruiz, retired minister, current community conspirator, viewed the world like a chessboard, but played like a jazz musician. "You're not building saviors," he told Graham, palms up. "You're building stewards." Ruiz had married couples who kept their promises and those who tried. He'd buried kids the city forgot how to count. He'd led candlelight vigils that smelled like wax and courage. He looked at Graham like a teacher looks at a student who might finally be ready to show his work. "Start small," Ruiz said. "Start money, think compost, not fireworks." Mara scribbled that in her notebook and underlined it twice. They met with Marino in a room that didn't pretend to like them. "You'll make enemies," she said. "We already have them," Graham said. "Good," she said. "They're useful. They tell you where to aim." They aimed Star Lantern where the night pooled deepest. The project took a shape you could hold in your hands. Microgrants to single guardians, no paperwork that broke your back. Libraries and underfunded schools, weekend meal packs that didn't announce themselves with shame. Legal support for families who needed to say no to bullies with badges. And one anchor, the Star Lantern Learning Commons, a school designed with the audacity to believe safety is not a luxury. Solar panels, garden, kitchen that fed without question. Parent room with childcare, reading nooks that felt like tree houses. Hallways wide enough for wheelchairs and hope. They didn't do a ribbon cutting. They did a conversation. A town hall at the Commons with folding chairs and hot cocoa and paper cups. Penn sent protesters who held signs that said, "Keep democracy public," as if democracy had been kidnapped and Graham had its phone. Graham stood at the mic. "You're right to be skeptical," he said. "People like me have hurt this city more than once. But look at who this is for." He pointed to Zuri in the front row, to Loretta beside her, to Jamal poking his tongue through the gap in his teeth, to a woman whose baby slept through the speeches because exhaustion outranked hope. "If this fails, I fail. Not you. But doing nothing? That's the failure we've accepted for too long." A man in the back asked, "What makes you think you know our kids?" "I don't," Graham said. "That's why Zuri's helping design it." Loretta rose like a storm made of sunlight. "He knows how to listen," she said. "Do you?" Silence did what applause later couldn't. The CPS hearing that followed should have been clinical. It wasn't. Two representatives with clipboards and a city lawyer met Loretta in a room with acoustics designed to make truth sound smaller. "Why didn't you seek formal support when you took guardianship?" they asked. "Because I was busy keeping her alive," Loretta said, steady. "Because I dawned to trust a system that files my life when I need a hand. And now you live in a unit provided by Mr. Whitaker. Does that not raise concerns?" "It raises our heat," Loretta said. "That's what it raises." "Is he exploiting your granddaughter? Has she been in a commercial, a photo op, a fake Christmas card?" "No." Loretta tilted her head. "He writes notes. He buys sketchbooks. That's exploitation." The younger CPS worker looked down, her expression one part grief, two parts recognition. They closed the file a week later with a bureaucratic sigh that sounded like shame's little brother. Penn responded by leaking emails that implied a conspiracy because when you can't win clean, you hope mud sticks. It didn't. Marino announced an ethics inquiry into Penn's office with the clinical precision of a surgeon. "Abuse of authority will not be tolerated," she said. "Nor will using children as props in your campaign ads, Victor." Penn smiled for the cameras like a man whose teeth had NDSS. Zuri's drawing for the school mural, "Home is not a lock," was selected for the district showcase. It showed a block of apartments at night, warmth at every window. Silhouettes doing small sacred things, a woman knitting, kids dancing in a kitchen, a man reading to a child on a couch that had seen things. In one window, a girl sketched at a desk. The word belonging arced over the roofline like dawn. Miss Dorsey teared up when she saw it and tried not to make a scene. "Do you know what you've done?" she whispered. "Drawn what's true," Zuri said, matter of fact. Jamal asked if he could paint the stars. Zuri told him, "Only if you count them first." He stayed up 3 nights trying and fell asleep in math with star numbers scrawled across his knuckles. Miss Dorsey wrote a note, "You can rest here." He did, head on desk, mouth open, unashamed. The opening day of the Learning Commons arrived with snow again, a soft encore. Folding chairs dotted the courtyard. The bronze statue unveiled at sunrise showed a girl with her hand outstretched, not begging, not blocking, just offering lift. The plaque read, "To those who dare to belong." Mayor Marino spoke, then stepped aside. Zuri stepped up in a navy coat Loretta had altered with pride and good scissors. Around her neck hung a small carved pendant shaped like a paintbrush Avery's initials etched in the back, gifted by Graham with hands that shook when he fastened it. "I'm not anyone special," Zuri began. "I was just cold one winter and asked for a hug." The crowd half laughed, half cried. "A hug didn't fix everything, but it made someone see me. When someone sees you, you start to believe you matter." She unfolded an old drawing, a lighthouse that had kept her alive on paper. "I want this place to be a light when it's dark. I want it to be a kitchen when your fridge is quiet, a garden when your block is gray, a library when your brain is loud. A hug if you need one. And if anyone asks you why it exists, tell them, because kids are not budgets, we're futures." The applause was not polite, it was relief. Inside, classrooms smelled like new paint and sharpened pencils. The greenhouse hummed with growing things. The kitchen crew stacked weekend meal packs with the efficiency of love that had learned to move fast. Parents walked hallways with their shoulders down for the first time all month. Graham stood under the bronze statue and tried to memorize the sound of belonging. Ruiz joined him, hands buried in his heavy coat. "You built a building," Ruiz said. "She built a pulse," Graham said. He visited Loretta's apartment later with a bag from the bakery downstairs and a bouquet wrapped in brown paper, because sometimes you offer light and carbs. "You're in," Loretta told him, taking the bag like she'd always intended to receive baked goods from billionaires and make them do the dishes. "In the family," she said. "You can't scare easy and you already know how to take a joke. We keep those." They laughed, and Zuri drew them while they laughed. She caught the crinkles by their eyes, the way people look when the room is warm and their bodies remember. But the city was still a city, which meant triumph and trouble took turns. A late storm burst a water pipe in the Learning Commons basement. Zuri, Jamal, and a dozen parents showed up with towels and box fans like a chorus, Ruiz passing out rubber gloves like communion. Graham waded ankle-deep through the water with an expression half chagrin, half amused grimness. Mara arrived in boots and a project manager's temper. "We build redundancies," she said to the contractor on speakerphone. "Not baptisteries." A teenager tagged the exterior wall with a slur in letters so neat they looked like typeset. Loretta found him before the principal did. "Why?" she asked, not unkind. He shrugged, trying out apathy like a jacket that didn't fit, "Because it's there." "What do you want to be?" she asked. "Loud," he said. "Then we'll hire you for the mural program," she said. "And you can learn what loud sounds like when it isn't lazy." He showed up the next day, embarrassed and hungry. Ruiz fed him a sandwich and a lecture. He painted clouds that looked like second chances. In the middle of all this, ordinary life threaded through like the steady part of a song. Zuri's reading group discovered the joy of books with maps in the front. Miss Dorsey taught the way maps were promises. Here be monsters meant someone had gone that far and lived to draw it. Jamal learned long division the way some boys learn dribbling slow, then confident. He wore his success like a new shirt and grew half an inch between March and April. According to Loretta's doorframe measurements, Mara got sick for the first time anyone could remember and tried to run meetings from bed. Loretta sent soup and a 2-line voice memo that said, "Sit down," in a tone that made even bosses obey. Graham delivered a humidifier and 3 ridiculous candles that smelled like a forest trying to apologize for winter. Mara texted a selfie in a bathrobe with 2 thumbs up. "The revolution continues Monday," she wrote. Graham visited Avery's grave for the first time in a long time with a letter in his pocket he didn't intend to read, but did anyway. It said, "We're building something that outlives grief. Your name is in the foundation because you re the reason I remember what love looks like when it has work to do." He left a small lantern on the headstone, battery operated, a little cheesy. When the wind knocked it over, he righted it and laughed until he cried, and then laughed again. Then came the bus. On a Tuesday that smelled like thaw, a bus driver had a heart attack at the wheel, and the world tipped. The bus jumped the curb slow enough to be forgivable, fast enough to make stories. Graham, passing by, blocked traffic with his car and helped pull children from the back seat while paramedics worked in the front. He did CPR with trembling arms as Loretta coached him like a battlefield sergeant over the phone, counting with him like she was keeping time in a hymn. The driver lived. When the news asked for a statement, Graham said, "The kids all knew the emergency exit procedures, thanked their teachers, and disappeared back into the city." #priorities. The internet captioned the still of him handing out blankets. The photo he loved from the day was the one Zuri drew, a bus like a whale, people like determined ants, a city like a willing witness. Star Lantern began to ripple into everything. A second school design got greenlit in Southgate. The library program became a traveling cart with wheels that squeaked with enthusiasm. A tech worker donated laptops with stickers already affixed. "This machine believes in you." Ruiz started a dad's night where men learned to sit on tiny chairs and listen without fixing. A janitor who watched too many fights at the old school taught a class called Conflict Like a Grown-Up. The kitchen experimented with jerk chicken Thursdays because a grandmother named Althea insisted and then proved, beyond a doubt, that taste is politics. Not everything was smooth. Rumors swirled. People argued on the internet. A council subcommittee tried to starve the commons with paperwork. Mara weaponized bullet points. Graham learned the art of the public no. Loretta learned the art of the well-placed eye roll. "Baby, we're not doing that today." And politicians wilted like overwatered plants. Jamal's uncle got laid off. Jamal started working evenings at the bodega, nervous pride sagging his shoulders. Zuri and Graham showed up with flashcards and a portable lamp like the nerdy Avengers. They did fractions amid the hum of refrigerators and the occasional clink of bottles. Jamal's uncle, who had never said thank you the same way twice, slid a bag of chips across the counter. "Community discount," he said. They paid anyway. One quiet evening, Graham stood on his balcony with a glass of water and discovered that he didn't want whiskey. Below, the river slid by like it knew secrets but was patient. He wore the tiny lighthouse pin, as always, above his heart. "Hey, kiddo," he said to the air, to Avery, to the new ache that felt like healing. "We did a thing." The air didn't answer. It didn't have to. Something inside him did, a quiet that sounded like yes. And because the world likes its symmetry, the snow returned months later, not as a rerun, but as a reminder. People still hurt each other. People still chose one another. The commons got scuffed and loved and repaired. The lanterns Zuri imagined lit themselves over block parties, over vigils, over report card nights, over soup lines that grew shorter and then some weeks long again. On a winter evening, if you stood across the street and looked closely, you could see it. A small hand-painted, sign-taped crooked on the door by someone in a hurry which said what everyone knew and needed reminding of anyway. Come in. You belong. The morning after the second snow, the city woke slow. Buses coughed to life. Coffee shops steamed windows like fogged glasses. Zuri stared out from 4C at a world scrubbed to the bone. She pressed her palm to the glass. It pressed back with a cold honesty she liked. Bundle, Loretta called. We're catching the 740. 740 is a personality, Zuri said, pulling on boots. It's crinky. You're not wrong, Loretta said. She wound a scarf around Zuri's neck with the tenderness of someone tying a bow on a gift she refused to give away. They hit the sidewalk as Graham's sedan eased to the curb. He stepped out wearing a ridiculous hat and knit thing with a pom-pom Zuri had chosen on a dare. It made him look slightly less like a man whose emails had subject lines and more like a person who remembered marching band fundraisers. You're going to be late, Loretta scolded the car, for reasons known only to elders and engines. Chauffeur's on my payroll, Graham said. He can be late if I'm holding up the reason. Don't get cute, Loretta warned. Cute has a lifespan. Zuri tugged Graham's sleeve. I have a hypothesis, she announced. Proceed, Graham said, adopting his best scientist face. If you get on the bus with us, the 740 will behave, she said. That's not how buses work, Graham said, but also yes. They climbed aboard, coins clinking, and found a seat 3 from the back, because the very back was for kids who had mastered both swagger and detention. A woman with grocery bags smiled around the exhaustion in her eyes. A man in a city worker jacket slept upright in the artful way of men who had taught themselves that rest could be stolen. Zuri leaned into Graham like she had no memory of ever asking permission. I have a presentation today, she said, at school. What's it about? Cities that are kind on purpose. Graham glanced at Loretta, whose mouth did something proud and small. Cite your sources, Loretta said. I will, Zuri promised. I'll cite Nana and Dom and Jerk Chicken Thursdays, and the way the greenhouse smells like someone is telling the truth. Good sources, Graham said, peer-reviewed by noses. Zuri giggled into her scarf. At Harborview, Miss Dorsey arranged desks in a circle because arguments behaved better when you could see who you were refusing to become. Zuri set up her trifold board, a constellation of sketches and notes, and a pocket glued to the corner labeled, What We Forgot to Say. Jamal shuffled beside her with a shoebox diorama of a park reimagined, swings at wheelchair height, textured paths for canes, a stage built of pallets for open mix and repentant politicians. Ready? Miss Dorsey asked. I was born ready, Zuri said, then reconsidered. No, I wasn't, but I practiced. She presented cities like orchestra scores, how sanitation was percussion and schools, where strings in transit was brass and gardens were the small instruments that made everything else sound like itself. She talked about windows that opened and doors that didn't assume hands were strong. She talked about water fountains that worked and bathrooms that didn't make girls decide between hydration and dignity. She said, we a lot. She didn't apologize. Jamal went next, voice shaking until it didn't. He talked about how parks could teach you to share space and how most fights were chairs in the wrong place. My uncle says men don't talk, he said, coloring. But I hear them. They talk in grunts and weather and in how they hand you the wrench. The class sat hushed. Miss Dorsey, who had perfected the art of cry without smearing, dabbed the corner of one eye. You're both hired, she said finally. For what? Jamal asked, alarmed. For the future, Miss Dorsey said. It pays poorly and in glory. They laughed, and the bell interrupted because bells have terrible timing. At City Hall, the ethics inquiry into Penn's office picked up speed. Staffers who had once thought themselves small discovered they could be large. One, a young mother with a tired bun and nails bitten to diplomacy, slid documents to the investigators that showed emails where Penn had scribbled. make a stink in the margins of policy briefs that had nothing to do with children and everything to do with cameras. Marina's chief of staff, a man who wore his suits like borrowed authority, briefed her. "He's going to call this a witch hunt," he said. Marina sipped her coffee like it was evidence. "Then let him produce the broom," she said. "We'll test it for fingerprints." When the hearing convened, Loretta and Ruiz sat in the gallery with a small army of aunties whose jewelry was both decorative and declarative. Graham sat 2 rows behind, uncharacteristically quiet, hat removed, hair a bang for once. Zuri stayed at school Loretta's rule. The city could be remade without children carrying the bricks, but she would ask for the play-by-play later like a sportscaster. Tone, plays, fouls. 10 spoken sentences that had clearly prepared for television and were furious to find themselves in a room with bad acoustics. "This is about the sanctity of public decision-making," he said, jaw tensioned into heroism. The investigator asked him to define sanctity. He did poorly. Loretta clucked. Ruiz hummed. The aunties took notes for sport. When the staffer with the bitten nails testified, her voice shook, but her receipts didn't. She read an email where Penn had referred to Zuri as a vector. The word hung in the room like a smell. "Vector," Loretta repeated, tasting it like something she didn't intend to swallow. "Baby, you're about to be algebra." The gallery snorted against its will. The investigator didn't, but her eyes liked Loretta. Penn blustered. Cameras collected. Outside, the snow fell with the stubbornness of people who know they're right. That night, after soup and homework and a cartoon that made no narrative sense but healed something anyway, Zuri lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Graham sat on the edge of the bottom bunk, not because she needed him to, but because he wanted to witness how her day landed in her. Loretta folded laundry with the tempo of a metronome that had graduated. "What do we do when people call us names?" Zuri asked. "We remember ours," Loretta said. "What do we do when they make rules like nets?" Zuri added. "We learn to swim," Graham said, then frowned. "We also cut the nets." Zuri nodded. "Roofs and hearts," she said. "Roofs and hearts," Graham echoed. Zuri's eyelids drooped. "If the ceiling falls," she murmured, "promise you'll hold it with me." "We will," Loretta said, her voice the sound a house makes when it settles. Graham looked at the ceiling like it had just been given a job. A week later, the Commons hosted its first Fix-It night. People brought lamps that flickered and radios that forgot music and chairs that limped. A retired electrician named Ada presided like a benevolent god with wire strippers and a patient smile. Jamal's uncle came to fix an old drill that had quit mid-stubborn. He pretended not to notice when Graham showed up with a toaster that only toasted regrets. "Hand me the sign maker," Ada said, and a teen in a hoodie passed her pliers. "We don't throw away what remembers us." She popped the toasters back like a secret and cleaned out 10 years of crumbs and 1 poker chip and something that might once have been marshmallow. "Try that," she said. The toaster resumed its life with a pop of triumph. People cheered like small miracles counted. They did. At the next table, a seamstress named Imani ran a mend and tell, corner where people patched jeans and also patched days that had frayed. "Put the loud thread on the inside," she told a boy repairing his backpack. "Let it hold what only you need to see." Loretta ran a pot of chili that could negotiate a ceasefire. Ruiz told a story about a church roof he deconvinced a roofing company to replace for free by baptizing the foreman's favorite pressure washer. The foreman still came to potlucks, washed aluminum pans like pennants. Zuri set up a tiny booth labeled "Borrow a pencil, borrow a ear." She drew quick pictures of the things people fixed: a lamp, a chair, a face. She drew Ada with a halo of lamp cords and Imani with a needle like a wand. She drew Graham's toaster wearing a cape. She taped the drawings to the wall in a gallery that made people stop mid-sentence and soften. Penn called the event Privatized maintenance of public failure on a podcast with 3 listeners and 2 sponsors. Mara framed the quote and hung it in the Commons bathroom with a note. Wash hands, keep receipts. Spring came like an apology the city wasn't sure it owed. The greenhouse at the Commons exploded in greens. Zuri helped plant tomatoes and learned what staking meant. Give the plant something to lean on, or it spends all its flavors standing upright. She took notes with her nose. Jamal discovered he liked dirt as a concept and cucumbers as reality. He carried a handful of seeds in his pocket for good luck and went. Marino convened a working group in a city hall room that had seen deals and betrayals and also, sometimes, miracles. Civic redesign, the agenda read, which sounded dry until Zuri unfurled a paper roll across the table. A school with round tables and open windows and a parent room with couches that did not complain. A garden, a kitchen, solar panels. A reading nook that looked suspiciously like a fort. Why the round tables? Marino asked, genuinely curious. Because it's harder to ignore someone when the table makes you look at them, Zuri said. And the parent room? Asked a city planner who still wore his Ivy League-like armor. So we stopped treating parents like visitors, Zuri said. The room fell quiet in the way rooms do when someone small says something large. Ruiz hummed an amen. Mara typed 3 emails to people who thought they were busy and weren't anymore. Pilot this, Marino said. Evaluate honest. Scale fast if it works. Slow if it almost works, but do not drown it in forms. Thank you, Mayor, Graham said. Don't thank me, Marino said. Build me something the budget can't argue with. We're on it, Mara said. That night, Graham met Mara at the Orbit Diner for the rare ritual of them eating in the same booth without a crisis zigzagging overhead. The server set down 2 coffees and a slice of pie, just because. You're thinking about Avery, Mara said. It wasn't a question. It never was, with her. I am, he said. And about how we almost built a monument to her and called it a foundation. Mara stirred her coffee like she was negotiating. We were children, she said. You were grieving. I was ambitious. We tried to outspend pain. Graham smiled without teeth. Now we're trying to outlove it. Which is slower, Mara said, and better. He looked at her and saw the lines tired joy had etched around her mouth. Why are you still here? He asked softly. She huffed. Who else will stop you from naming a school after yourself? Also, I like these people. These people. The ones who fix toasters and tell jokes in line and teach you that mending is a verb you can do to anything, including your calendar. Fair, he said. They clinked coffee cups like a pact. On the jukebox, an old song insisted the heart was what it had always been. Ridiculous, resilient, repairable. The morning after the hearing, the city tasted like the inside of a bell vibrating. Unsure whether the sound meant warning or worship, headlines tried to out-clever one another. Talk radio chewed the word vector until it lost shape. Somewhere a barista wrote Lorette on a paper cup and then crossed it out and tried again, because even names wanted the dignity of being heard correctly. Loretta did not read headlines. She read thermometers. A low-grade fever ran under her day like a frayed wire. She shook it off, fed Zuri, admonished Graham to wear gloves. Money can't buy you knuckles, and walked to church to set up chairs for the senior lunch, where casseroles arrive like weather, inevitable, sincere, occasionally mysterious. Ruiz watched her stack the last row and caught the wince she thought she'd hidden. Sit, he said. I'll sit when the chicken sits, she said, gesturing toward the warming trays. You will sit, he repeated, or I will invoke pastoral authority, which is rarer than solar eclipses and twice as dramatic. She swatted him with a dish towel. She sat. He called a nurse from the parish list, a woman named Neve, with hands that translated worry and a voice that made the blood pressure cuff behave. You're warm, Neve said, and your lungs sound like a door that needs oil. Loretta rolled her eyes, as if lungs were furniture and furniture learned eventually. Neve insisted, urgent care now. Loretta glanced at the tables, each one a small civilization of plastic forks and gentle arguments, and at Zuri's drawing on the bulletin board, a bowl labeled soul soup, she acquiesced. At Northbridge Urgent Care, a PA with tired sneakers listened and frowned. We're catching an infection early, he said. Antibiotics. Rust, fluids. He handed over a prescription like a benediction. Rust, Loretta repeated, incredulous. I'm a grandmother. Then model it, he said, and for that insolence he earned a smile. Graham arrived with tea that believed in ginger and a bag of groceries that tried to look casual. He set them down and didn't hover, which was, in Loretta's calculus, the only acceptable way to hover. I'm fine, she announced. You're formidable, he corrected. And human. She sniffed. Don't spread that. He folded himself into the corner chair like a tall man learning humility. Zuri climbed into his lap because laps are furniture too. They watched a cooking show where a chef corrected a sauce with the same tenderness Loretta used on people. Zuri assessed the host with clinical neutrality. He needs more salt, she said. Loretta would have agreed if she'd been awake. The ethics committee released its preliminary findings on a Tuesday that smelled like paper and rain. The summary cited inappropriate leveraging of municipal resources for political retaliation. It named staff who deserved apologies and a public who deserved better. It did not use the word vector. Loretta put the printout on her fridge with a magnet shaped like a banana because solemn things live better next to jokes. Penn held a press conference edged with flop suite. The cameras took attendance. This is a smear, he declared. Funded by billionaires? He avoided saying Graham's name as if names carried evocation magic. Our neighborhoods don't need boutique charities. They need public commitment. Ruiz, watching from the Commons Lounge, nodded at the screen. Correct premise, wrong witness, he said. Mara, beside him, typed. Pull the line, she murmured. We'll use it Thursday. She scheduled a town hall titled Public Commitment Looks Like This and tapped send with the satisfaction of a baker sliding a loaf into an oven. Graham disliked cameras, but he disliked Vig more. At the town hall, under fluorescent lights that made everyone equal, he spoke plainly. If the city funds it, bless you. If it doesn't, we will, until you can. We are not replacing government. We are refusing to let waiting be a policy. Marino attended without entourage. She asked 2 questions that were not traps, then said, okay, here's where the city can meet you. Permitting fast lanes, data transparency, and leases that don't punish success. She glanced at the audience. This is not romance. It's infrastructure. Applause. Someone whooped. Someone else asked about parking because there is always that person and cities are, if nothing else, parking arguments with skylines. Southgate sat 3 bus lines and a world away from. Northbridge brick row houses with front stoops that taught you how to sit in community. Corner stores with bulletproof glass and bulletproof hope. A park with swings that hung until gravity convinced them otherwise. The second commons would live in a retired post office with bones that liked mail and would, with persuasion, like children. On the first walkthrough, the group wore hard hats and optimism. Zuri trailed a hand along the countertop where letters once learned their destinations. We should keep this, she said. For lost and found. For notes you don't know where to send yet. Mara wrote it down. We'll call it the dispatch, she said. A retired postal worker named Beatrice volunteered to run it. I can get packages to people, she said. Feelings are just heavier parcels. The old sorting room became a multi-purpose studio. Morning parent coffee, midday dance class, evening ESL, with a teacher who wielded idioms like party favors. The loading bay became a covered play space, chalked in hopscotch grids that multiplied like cells. The vault steel door, thick with the history of secrets, stayed a vault. but now for art supplies and the sound system teenagers would use with both brilliance and poor judgment. Contractors raised walls. Volunteers painted them. The color palette leaned toward late afternoon and library spines. Zuri protested a beige. "It's the color forgotten," she said. The wall tried again and arrived at honey. "That," she approved. "That one remembers." Graham learned the difference between a change order and a tantrum. Mara learned 3 electricians by name and which donuts made them agree to Saturday work. Ruiz learned to bless scaffolding. Loretta, unstable breath and schedule, learned to sit in a folding chair and say, "No higher," about picture frames like she'd hung every gallery in town. Jamal discovered he could fix things that didn't look like math, which was just math with paint on. He and Beatrice drew a map of the new commons with a legend that read, "Here be snacks." Mara's mother arrived unannounced on a windless afternoon, which is the exact time mothers prefer. She led with a hug and a complaint about the front desk not having peppermints, which meant she approved. Mara laughed in a way that made Graham look up from his laptop like a groundhog seeing spring. "Ma," Mara said, which contained a career and a childhood and an apology for ever having left. Teresita Torres wore a cardigan like armor and shoes like arguments. She raised 5 children and 2 nieces, worked nights in a hospital laundry, and had opinions about almost everything, which she felt no need to deliver gently. "So," she said, hands on hips, taking in the commons, "you finally found a job where bossing everyone around is charity?" "Operations," Mara corrected. "Operations," her mother repeated, impressed and unconvinced. "And your boss? Unbossable," Mara said, "and learning?" Teresita turned to Graham. "You the one making my daughter sleep less?" "Yes," Graham said, "and I am also the one she saved." Teresita squinted, parsing for performance. You look like a man who used to eat sorrow for breakfast." "I did," he admitted. "What do you eat now?" "Toast," he said, "and sometimes hope." "Toast burns," she warned. "Hope does too," he said, and for that she gave him a nod that inducted him into a club he hadn't known he wanted to join. Later, over empanadas that could rehabilitate a cynic, Teresita asked the questions no investor had thought to. Who's cleaning the bathrooms? Who's making the schedule no one sees? Who holds the keys in the kitchen when the snow traps the bus line, and mothers arrive with strollers, and we are all tired? Mara answered each in turn. We rotate, we pay. We write it down. She tapped a binder labeled boring crucial. Graham nearly wept at the accuracy. Teresita kissed her daughter's forehead and, on the way out, slipped a small wrapped statue into Zuri's hand, a tiny clay saint, patron of lost things and punctual plumbers. "For the vault," she said, "not for praying, for remembering." Zuri set it on a shelf with Ava's eyes initials and a post-it that read, "Saint of Spilled Paint Too." Zuri's first big public design win arrived like a surprise party thrown by competence. The city announced a contest, redesign a pocket park long surrendered to habit and cigarette breaks. The guidelines, small budget, big impact, community vote. The prize, a microgrant and 3 Saturdays of DPW labor. Miss Dorsey encouraged her class to submit. "Civic homework," she said, eyes bright. "The kind worth doing." Zuri and Jamal partnered. They named their entry Fort Hello. They sketched modular seating that could be rearranged by kids without adult permission. They included a game panel, a wheel you spun to land on a kindness dare, compliment a stranger's shoes, ask someone their favorite song, offer the last donut. They planted native grasses because those knew how to mind their own business and still look pretty. They added a rain garden for the corner that always flooded because the sidewalk there believed in impressions. They presented at the community center in front of folding chairs and judges who seen a lot and still liked being surprised. Zuri wore her navy coat and her pendant and her composure. Jamal wore a shirt with buttons that he only touched 4 times during the speech, which qualified as poise. A man in the back asked the question that always came. What about vandalism? Zuri answered, we expect it. We appoint a teen crew to repaint weekly. We supply the paint. If you give people permission to fix, they learn not to break as much. Murmurs. The good kind. Miss Dorsey squeezed Ruse's hand. He pretended not to notice, but did not let go. The vote opened online and in person. Flyers bloomed on telephone poles. The tech worker with the laptop stickers hacked together a simple site with accessibility settings that made the city IT guy blush and then ask for a copy. People voted at bodegas and barbershops in between bites at Jerk Chicken Thursday. Fort Hello won by a margin that made headlines, but more importantly to Zuri, made grandmothers nod. DPW arrived with cones and caution tape and loud vests. The foreman, a woman named Gia, whose biceps were municipal policy, walked the plan with Zuri and Jamal. You're the bosses, Gia said. I'm the adult. She winked. We'll get it done. They did. The wheels spun. The grasses swayed. The benches rearranged themselves like they were listening. On opening day, a toddler in mismatched boots spun the wheel, and it landed on. Share your snack. He considered his graham cracker, then offered a crumb to his sister, then another crumb, then, surprised by his own generosity, the whole cracker. His mother laughed until she cried. First miracle of the park, Ruiz declared, pronouncing it official. That afternoon, graffiti appeared. Not a slur, not a tag, just the word hi in bubble letters with a smiley face. Jamal grabbed the paint and, with the solemnity of ritual, added, stay. Graham drifted to the park at dusk and sat on a bench that remembered him. He watched a trio of teenage girls choreograph a TikTok in Manu Light and not be hassled by anyone pretending to protect them from joy. He watched a man in a suit eat a hot dog like confessional. He watched an older couple share earbuds and the same song, heads tilted toward a private radio. Penn, who followed the city like a shadow trying to be thematic, appeared on the corner with a camera crew that looked bored and underpaid. He took in the wheel, the grasses, the joy he hadn't authorized, and chose indignation. Tax dollars, he began, gesturing toward the DPW logo like an accusation. 3 Saturdays, Gia said, stepping into frame, arms crossed, biceps now biblical. And if you have a better use for 6 men in a truck on March weekends, please enlighten me. The cameraman smothered a smile. Penn recalibrated. Vulnerability to misuse, he tried. Like microphones, Gia asked. They did not air that cut. At Southgate Commons, the dispatch filled with notes that shouldn't be swallowed. Need a winter coat. Kid size 8. Looking for a ride to PT appointment Thursday. Lost. Blue backpack with drawings inside. Found. Courage. Temporary. Zuri curated with Beatrice, pinning the urgent, gently editing the complicated, adding doodles of tiny lanterns to the corners. People answered with pushpins and arrows and the slanted handwriting of those who had never felt at home in forms. On a Wednesday, a note appeared in a careful hand. Seeking algebra tutor. Payment and empanadas. Jamal tore off the tab with a number like a man saving his own GPA. He called. He attended. He ate. He learned. On a Friday, someone left a sealed envelope addressed to Graham in block letters. Inside, a newspaper clipping of his press conference and a single sentence, handwritten, "Sometimes the rich are human." No signature. He put it in his wallet behind the photo of Avery that made him both braver and worse. Loretta attended Mend and Tell and stitched a tear in a child's coat with thread, the color of exclamation. Neve led a workshop on breathing like you mean it. Ruiz hosted Dads and Donuts and then retitled it Grown Folk and Feelings when grandmothers showed up and ate 3 donuts each, unbothered by nouns. Mara managed the unglamorous, inspection schedules, W9 South, air filters, one terrifying afternoon with a grease trap. She hired a custodian named Felix who treated floors like mirrors and microphones, surfaces that told on you if you disrespected them. She convinced a nervous donor to fund a second greenhouse by explaining ROI in cucumbers per argument. At night, when the commons hushed itself, Mara walked the halls with a clipboard and a desire she refused to call faith. She paused at the wall of instructions, a gentle list illustrated by Zori. 1. Ask before you fix. 2. Fix before you judge. 3. Eat. 4. If the kitchen is closed, it is open. 5. If you can carry 2 chairs, carry 2 chairs. 6. If you cannot carry, point and we will carry. 7. Talk softly. 8. Laugh loudly. 9. Write down what worked. 10. Write down what didn't. Mara touched the 10th rule like a rosary, then went home and slept the particular sleep of people who have turned lists into shelter. The ethics committee moved to censure. Marino, careful and flinty, announced a special session. Penn counter-programmed with a rally whose slogan failed to scan. He hired a band that played the wrong song. He stood on a crate and promised to protect neighborhoods from plutocratic hobbyists, a phrase that sounded like a Scrabble flex. At the session, the chamber filled with the kind of crowd that knows history without needing to be told where to sit. Loretta wore a dress the color of defiance. Zuri, at school, wore a t-shirt she had stenciled. Safety is a public utility. Jamal wore his too under a hoodie, like an inside joke with policy. Penn spoke as if words were bricks he could throw. The vote rolled like a tide. Censure passed. He kept his seat but lost something more expensive, the room. Outside, microphones clustered like bees. Graham slipped away. He had no desire to be the face of anyone else's fall. He walked to the river and breathed until the cold corrected him. He called Mara and said nothing. She said, okay. Sometimes okay means keep walking, I'm beside you. At precisely 3:07 p.m. on a Tuesday, the fire alarm at Northbridge Commons yelped like a dog convinced of burglars. It was a false alarm pulled by a child whose curiosity outran instruction. The building emptied calmly because drills weren't theater. They were choreography. Zuri shepherded 2 kindergartners with the gravitas of a crossing guard. Jamal latched the back gate and counted heads. Ruiz grabbed the first aid kit and the candy jar priorities or theology. After, on the sidewalk, the fire captain, an exasperated woman who smelled faintly of maple syrup, conducted a teachable moment. We pull alarms when we see smoke or smell what shouldn't be cooking, she said. We do not pull alarms because the handle is shiny and your uncle told you you were brave. The culprit stepped forward, a small boy with a stubborn lip and a name tag that read Prince. I wanted to see the truck, he confessed. You and me both, the captain said, softening, and gave him a tour with the consequence baked in, 10 leaf rakes the next day, supervised by Felix, who raked like a meditation and talked like a mentor. Prince raked. He did not pull an alarm again. He did, however, learn the difference between brave and loud. Graham's penthouse lost some of its chill. The artwork stayed expensive but less lonely. On the grand piano he never played, a stack of Zuri's drawings fanned like a deck rigged for grace. Among them, a little ink sketch of him and Mara and Loretta on the diner bench, 3 heads tilted toward a plate of fries. Laughing, he framed that one without permission. He started saying yes to small invitations and no to grand ones. He joined a Tuesday night chess club at the library and was trounced by a 4th grader named Ivy, who said checkmate like a lullaby. He volunteered on Thursdays to read the weather in Ms. Dorsey's class. Today's forecast is coats, and mastered the art of losing it all in a way that tutored self-esteem. He visited Avery's grave with less theatrics, more conversation. He told her about Fort Hello, about Saint of Spilled Paint, about Jamal's shy grin when he nailed a proof. He told her about Loretta's chili and Ruiz as improvised benedictions and Mora, Smothers empanadas, and the way Zuri's eyes widened when a new idea landed. He left stones on the headstone as if to say, "We are building, we are weighing, we're staying." Not every story thread stitched neatly. A donor tried to rename the Southgate greenhouse after his dog. "No," Mara said, "and may Pepper's memory be a blessing." A bus route change stranded 3 families an extra 15 minutes from the Commons. The dispatch mapped walking buddies, and because joy is logistics, added hot chocolate to the route. A city inspector demanded an additional exit sign that would have ruined the aesthetic of a mural. Zuri designed one that hid in the art and glowed like a secret. The inspector, a man unaccustomed to delight, asked sheepishly if she could do his niece's science fair poster. She did. The niece won 3rd place with a volcano that overachieved. Loretta's health wandered as bodies do. Good days stacked like pancakes. Bad days arrived unannounced, took the couch, and asked for attention. She paced herself, a verb she did not love. Neve checked in, a pulse with a smile. Graham learned the difference between hovering and witness, and practiced the latter until it became a habit as natural as carrying 2 chairs. Zuri learned soup recipes and inhaler schedules, and the geometry of sitting close without crowding. On one hard night, wind whirring the window, Loretta dozed in her chair while Zuri drew her sleeping. Not-sainted mouth open, hair scarf slipping, hand still holding the TV remote like a baton. Underneath she wrote, "General at rest." She showed it to Graham in the hallway with the weight of a gift. He pinched the bridge of his nose and did not cry, not exactly, but the air got salty. "Keep that," he said. "For future museums, which shelf?" she asked, stalling the ache with logistics. "The one we label proof," he said. She nodded. "We need a lot of those." "We do," he said. "We're making them." Summer crept up like a patient joke. The Commons opened its program list, a dance class taught by a retired mailman whose nickname was Two-Step Tony, a coding class taught by a woman who used to rewrite COBOL and now taught JavaScript like it had been waiting its whole life to be friendly, a poetry workshop where teens constructed metaphors strong enough to move furniture, a clinic where volunteers fixed bikes and also attitudes. Zuri split time. Mornings at Fort Hello, afternoons in the greenhouse, evenings at the big table finishing a portfolio that didn't know whether it was for college or heaven. Jamal got a job at the bodega with an apron that made him look like authority. He learned the difference between customers who needed change and those who needed a sentence. He made both when he could. On a humid Tuesday, a storm found a weakness in the Southgate roof and sent a sheet of water down the stairwell, like the world had decided to baptize everything. People arrived with towels and buckets and fans. Ruiz organized like a conductor. Mara called 3 roofers. 1 answered. The others were cursed gently in 2 languages. Graham climbed the ladder and held a tarp in place while rain needled his knuckles into attention. Loretta, wearing rubber-soled slippers and the look that melts stubborn men, directed traffic like an airfield marshal. Zuri filmed 10 seconds and then put the phone away because some memories belong to bodies. After soaked and triumphant, they ate pizza on the floor, grease sanctifying cardboard. The power blinked back. Someone cheered. The vending machine beeped an error code and then vendored a free bag of pretzels. "A miracle," Ruiz declared, distributing them like Eucharist. At the bottom of the stairs, a new puddle reflected the ceiling lights like stars who had come indoors to rest. Marino convened the working group again, this time in a school gym where the floors squeaked under consensus. She unveiled a pilot for community operating agreements, a boring name for a brave idea, small, flexible contracts with organizations like Star Lantern to do what bureaucracy couldn't do fast enough. The metrics were written by people who had to live with them, Fewer missed days, more library cards, fewer emergency room visits for asthma, more parents who knew 3 officials by first name. Accountability isn't punishment, Marino said. It's choreography. She looked at Graham. Don't make me regret trusting you. Don't make me regret trusting you, he volleyed, smiling. And the room groaned like a sitcom audience at season 3. Comfortable, invested. Penn objected, of course. He staged a hearing called Neighborhood Sovereignty that turned into a roast. Loretta spoke. Sovereignty without soup is a meeting, she said. The clip trended. A dad made shirts. The shirts funded art supplies. Irony sent a thank you note and asked for a tax receipt. On the evening Fort Hello hosted its first open mic, a girl in a denim jacket read a poem about a houseplant that kept trying, and the park went still the way rooms do when a young person names the thing you were pretending not to see. A boy rapped softly about brothers and bus stops. Ruiz told a story about a man who gave him a lemon and said it was a metaphor. Ruiz made lemonade and said, so is this. Jamal read a paragraph about math that was really about tenderness. The wheel spun. Offer the last donut. A man in a suit did. He looked surprised at how good he felt and how ordinary. Graham didn't read. He listened, which is a verse in its own right. Mara read the rules and then broke one by laughing too loudly. Zuri drew hands mid-applause. Loretta, whose breath had steadied into a truce, clapped so hard her palms went pink. Above them, the sky practiced a new shade of blue that made people kinder than they intended. The lanterns Zuri had imagined for years first on paper, then in talk. Now in steel and solar on the commons roofs clicked on. They were not dramatic. They were enough. On the corner, the bus hissed. On a stoop, a woman braided a child's hair as if the night had a schedule. Somewhere a siren passed and the crowd paused and then went on, because living is a stubborn art. Graham looked at the girl who had once asked a stranger for a hug, and at the woman who had taught the city what a spine is for, and at the friend who had built a bridge out of bullet points, and at the priest who believed in punchlines. He felt the old lock inside him, the one that sometimes clicked in the dark, stay open. He stood, because there was trash to pick up and folding chairs to carry and a borrowed mic to return. He stood, because belonging is a verb. Roofs and hearts, Zuri said, bumping his elbow with hers, as if reminding him of a meeting he could not miss. Roofs and hearts, he agreed. They walked home under a sky that refused to be anything but specific, and the city, complicated, unredeemed but redeemable, hummed itself towards sleep. The week after Fort Hello's open mic, the city remembered it was a bureaucracy. An email arrived at 6:43 a.m., the hour when coffee hasn't argued its case yet. Subject line, unannounced compliance visit today. Sender, State Office of Education and Facilities Oversight. Subtext, we heard about your joy. Please produce receipts. Mara read it twice, then once backward for fun. Okay, she said out loud to the room where the air had learned to expect instructions. We can do this. She sent a group text, surprise inspection at Northbridge Tanoma, burn calm. Bring binders. Bring the version of your smile that scares no one. Graham replied with a thumbs up emoji and a photo of 3 neatly stacked folders labeled safety, kitchen, havoc, because grief had taught him organization could be love. Loretta didn't text back. She showed up at 9:20 in a jacket, the color of paperwork, and earrings the color of rebellion. Zuri slid in behind her, wearing a backpack that could have been a filing cabinet of a past life. Ruiz arrived last, carrying a tray of muffins. No one fails a test on carbs, he declared. The inspectors entered at 10:03 in the uniform of their tribe. Sensible shoes, pens like swords. Their leader introduced herself as Miss Dalrymple Short, composed, eyes that had seen fraud, and also, occasionally, fireworks. She unhooked a clipboard from her satchel as if she were about to conduct a symphony of compliance. We're here to verify code adherence and the appropriateness of minor participants in governance structures, she said. Wonderful, Mara said, genuinely. Our governance is very minor. Zuri nearly snorted, but converted it into a cough, which Loretta patted into manners. They began with the kitchen thermometers calibrated, the walk-in humming with a lullaby of food at proper temperatures, hairnets stacked like tiny parasols. The lead inspector's eyebrows moved in grudging approval. Grease trap? She asked. Mara smiled. On Tuesdays in regret. In the greenhouse, the inspectors measured aisle widths and emergency egress signage. They checked the first aid kit bandages, saline, a roll of duct tape, a laminated card with Niam's number, and a list titled, "If you're scared, read this slowly." One inspector paused on the card. My therapist says the same thing, he murmured, then remembered his job and frowned professionally. They toured classrooms, noticing outlets with safety covers, windows that open like promises, tables with rounded edges because Square had cut too many knees. They glanced at the wall of instructions, Zuri's illustrated commandments, and wrote something down that looked suspiciously like good idea. In the multipurpose room, Mr. Rimple cleared her throat. We've also had concerns raised, she said carefully, about decision-making influence, specifically minors in steering roles. Zuri looked at Graham. He nodded once. No theatrics, only truth. Zuri stepped forward. I don't make grown-up decisions, she said. I make kid decisions about kid spaces. Adults vote on budgets and roofs. I vote on paint colors and which corners need feelings. I chair a committee called Are We Being Mean by Accident? We meet Thursdays. The inspector blinked. And your minutes? Zuri handed her a stapled packet. The cover sheet read Mean by Accident Committee Notes. Item 1. Stop putting the heaviest books on the highest shelves. Item 2. Bathrooms doors don't need to sound like secrets. Item 3. We say welcome 4 different ways, pick 2, and teach the other 2. Miss Dalrymple read silently for a moment, then smiled, a private thing that escaped anyway. Proceed, she said. They were halfway through the safety drill review when a siren pealed outside, the short, insistent kind that meant something was happening very close. Then another sound clicked into place, an alarm from the building next door, a warehouse the landlord had been promising to inspect for 13 months. Smoke, not dramatic yet, unspooled from a side vent like a ribbon finding wind. Mara didn't break eye contact with the inspector. We're activating our outbuilding protocol, she said, calm as a weather report. Ruiz. The Reverend moved like a man who had practiced chaos into choreography. Door team now, kitchen, hold. Neve, call the seniors on the second floor and keep them on phone. If you can see smoke, you can walk. Loretta collected the littles in one sweep of her arm and gaze. We walk in lines that know where they're going, she said. We do not scream. Screaming is for goats and televisions. Zuri tapped the fire panel and counted under her breath. Graham swung through the back hallway, checking bathrooms, closets, the small room where a shy kid, sometimes hid with a book and an intention to rejoin later. Empty. Good. He met Mara at the east door. She was texting Miss Dorsey, "We're okay." Smoke next door. Holding pattern. Outside, the warehouse coughed a darker plume. The fire department arrived, all competence and reflective tape. A Captain Maple Syrup woman from the false alarm pointed, shouted, flowed. The Commons crowd watched, a few hundred pairs of lungs practicing solidarity in unison. A paramedic approached young, afraid of nothing, which Zuri recognized as the most dangerous age. Anyone having difficulty breathing? He asked. Hands rose politely. He passed out masks. He handed one to Loretta. She waved it away. He raised an eyebrow. She took it, she put it on. The inspector stood with clipboards, now decorative. Miss Dalrymple looked at Mara. We'll reconvene when... When you're done watching us do the thing you're here to judge, Mara finished gently. Yes, we'll be here. The warehouse fire hissed like a bad memory. Sprinklers inside woke up slow but loyal. It ended before it had the chance to become a headline. When the captain gave the all clear, Ruiz clapped her shoulder. You coming to fix it, Knight? He asked. She laughed. If you let me apologize to Prince for scaring him last time. Then, softer to Mara, your drill was clean. Thank you, Mara said. She didn't say, we do them because we know what it is to be unprepared. Back inside, the Commons exhaled. The inspectors asked 3 more questions they thought would be gotchas and found answers instead. They shook hands with caution and left their business cards like seeds. Ms. Dalrymple lingered. My daughter, she said, almost embarrassed. She wants to draw buildings for a living. Bring her Saturday, Mara said. Zuri is hosting a workshop. Zuri stared. I am? You are now, Loretta said. Announced by the Department of Fate. They all laughed, the relieved kind that makes the body remember itself. They called the bridge Lantern Walk. The name came from Zuri's 4th drawing, the one where a bridge arched across a river of shadows, held up by hands instead of pylons. Engineers made the hands into ribs, metal curves that would catch the sun by day and the city's breath by night. Solar lanterns studded the rails, not too bright, not 20 each, etched with a single word chosen by the neighborhood, HOME. Listen, soup, future, stay. The city's transportation department loved the project in the way bureaucracies love beautiful math. Fewer pedestrian injuries, faster access to the bus hub, the kind of map arrow you could be proud of. Marino wrangled funding with a grin that said, I enjoy annoying the right people. Graham wrote a check for the difference and did not put his name on anything except the email subject line. We are doing this. Construction began in fall. The river, always eager to narrate, rose and fell, hissed at pilings, flirted with storms. Jamal interned on site, a hard hat hiding a boy who kept counting. He learned to read blueprints the way some kids read lyric sheets. He carried a notebook labeled things I should know already but don't, and filled it shamelessly. Zuri attended every design meeting she could elbow into. She presented a handrail sketch that widened near the middle to become a bench for those who misjudged their breath, a place to sit without announcing defeat. The structural engineer, an elegant woman with a laugh like a cymbal, nodded. We can do that, she said. We can do gentle. Loretto took one look at the early color swatches and vetoed anything that looked like a hospital waiting room. We're not pretending to be sterile, she said. We are not. We're clean because we use soap. Mara negotiated a clause in the contract that gave teen artists the right to engrave tiny icons near the base of each lantern silent Easter eggs for those who walk slowly. She also negotiated damage coverage and a changing stations, spec that made 3 departments argue until they ran out of objections and agreed to use the commons. Design as a template for future projects, which is how revolutions move from poetry to policy. On a Tuesday that believed in symbolism, they hoisted the final span. The city watched from sidewalks, windows, phones. A crane swung the last piece into place, and the bolts went in like decisions that had taken the time to be right. Ruiz sighed like a man tasting his grandmother's stew. We're lifting people, he said. Using steel. God loves metaphors that pay taxes. The crisis did not come from pen. It came from nowhere, which is where the hardest tests prefer to live. On a windy Thursday, just before dismissal, a stranger wandered into the Commons lobby, a man in his 30s, clean jacket, dirty eyes. He moved like a radio between stations. Felix noticed him first and asked the question that solves most puzzles. How can I help you? The man stared past him. My brother's kid is in this program, he said. I'm taking him home. Felix glanced at the sign-out screen. No matching name. What's the kid's name? Doesn't matter, the man said. He knows me. Mara got there in 8 steps. We have a process, she said, warm as a blanket, firm as a door. Come sit. We'll call the guardian. Loretta, at the desk, dialed. Ruiz materialized because God put clergy where tension gathers. Zuri watched from the stairs, one hand on the banister, another on the strap of her backpack, as if it could hold the building together. Jamal, across the room, stayed small and ready. The man grew louder, then quieter in the dangerous way. He took one step too close, a breath that felt like a dare. Graham, who had been in the office signing something that wouldn't matter later, stepped into the lobby and placed himself between the man and the rest of the world. His voice, when it arrived, had a tone no money could buy. "Sir," he said, "let's go outside." The man hesitated, then pushed. The shove wasn't violent. It was the kind that tries to edit rules. Graham stumbled and did not fall. Felix moved in, not as a bouncer, as a floor. The man swung, a frustrated arc that learned very quickly it was alone. Ruiz lifted his hands, palms out, priest and traffic cop. "Stop," he said, and the word had electricity in it. The door opened with the speed of planning. Two officers' faces from the monthly Know Your Neighbor and uniform coffee took in the room and, because history had taught them how to read, de-escalated instead of performing. The man's shoulders collapsed as if the fight had hitchhiked into him and left without paying. He sat. He cried. He said, "They took my sister's babies," and a story spilled out that made the room forgive his angles. They did not arrest him. They called a social worker who knew more of the edges of this family than her caseload allowed her to admit. Loretta made tea. Zuri disappeared and returned with a sketchbook and a crayon, which she pushed across the table without ceremony. The man stared at it like it might tell him what to do. He drew a circle very carefully and colored it in. "It's a stoplight," he said, "stuck on red." "We'll wait with you," Ruiz said. Graham's shoulder throbbed where the shove had voted. He refused ice. He accepted a hand on his baccalaureate brief and medicinal. Mara wrote down everything because memory is a terrible court stenographer. Later, when the room had reassembled itself, Zuri climbed the bottom stair and looked at Graham. "I was scared," she said. "Me too," he answered. "You didn't yell," she said. "I wanted to," he admitted. "Thanks for not," she said. "Yelling makes rooms small." He nodded, understanding something about Avery he hadn't named. How quiet had felt like safety in those final months when hospitals taught him he was not in charge. The board, predictably, panicked. Liability, exposure, reputational risk phrases tried to prove their usefulness. Mara sent a 3-sentence memo. 1, we behaved. 2, we de-escalated. 3, if this is the part that frightens you, recuse your money. This work isn't the right size for your fear. 3 donors left. 5 arrived, quieter, better. The newsletter did not mention any of it. The wall of instructions got a new line. 11, if a room gets smaller, make it bigger. They opened Lantern Walk on an evening that smelled like clean rain and free bread. The mayor cut no ribbon. There was none. Children did in their sneakers, each given a pair of scissors with foam handles and the authority to decide when a path was open. Zuri wore a jacket with pockets deep enough for pens, and an Allen key she would use twice. The crowd gathered at both ends. Ruiz said a blessing that blamed no one and thanked everyone. Mara handed out maps printed on paper that felt like an invitation. Graham stood back where headlines couldn't reach and watched a bridge built from a drawing on a kitchen table do the thing bridges do, invite crossing. Loretta walked in the first wave, slow, new cane tapping rhythm. Jamal pointed at an engraved icon of a tiny wrench near the third lantern and declared it his. Zuri found Avery's initials tucked under a railing curve, not public. Not a secret, then found her own, tiny next to it, testimony in steel. As dusk slid toward night, the solar lanterns woke one by one, small sons choosing to be reliable. A brass quartet from the high school played something that felt like the city remembering a melody it had almost forgotten. The river, newly adorned, behaved like a guest who'd been given the good chair. Halfway across, Zuri stopped, put both palms on the rail, and closed her eyes. Loretta stood at her shoulder, Graham on the other side. Like bookends on a shelf, title-proof, Zuri opened her eyes and grinned up at them. Main character energy? She asked. Loretta smirked. Baby, we're on a bridge? Everyone's the main character on a bridge. They laughed, and their laughter carried, got borrowed, returned with interest. On the far bank, a small plaque read, "For the ones who asked to be held, for the ones who learned how." It had no names. It didn't need them. Time, as it does when you are busy, both sprinted and took the scenic route. A year folded into 3. 3 learned how to be 7. Fort Hello needed replacing boards. They replaced them. The Commons' first class of teen chefs graduated into kitchens that paid and taught them to value knives and naps. The Dispatch got a sister in Southgate and a cousin in a neighborhood whose name the news only said when it had to pronounce sorrow. They renamed it the Loud Bulletin. The Mean by Accident Committee franchised itself at 2 other schools, producing a bound volume of corrections titled "Please Don't Make Us Beg for Water." Penn lost an election to a candidate who wore comfortable shoes and said, "We like a habit." He went on television twice a year and reminded people why he had lost, which is a service too. Marino won another term and left a note in the after-hours log for the next mayor that read, "Ask the kitchen first." They always know. Mara was recruited 3 times to run institutions that wanted the results without the mess. She said no thrice with notes attached. She did, however, agree to teach a class at the community college. Boring, crucial, operations for people who want their values to survive fire codes. It filled in 8 minutes. Teresita, from the front row, corrected her daughter's grammar once and was cheered for it. She took home 3 new friends and a syllabus she kept in the recipe drawer. Ruiz called himself retired again and then presided over 2 weddings, 3 block parties, and a protest with the best chant choreography in recent memory. He said he'd de-slow down next year and then installed shelves in the Commons pantry because canned goods deserve dignity. Felix adopted a cat that refused to catch mice and instead sat in the sun reading the room. He named it Union. Neve left urgent care to run a clinic that believed bodies were not crimes. She kept the laminated breathing card in the Commons first aid kit and added a second one. How to help when you can to fix. Graham sold a company and several arguments. He bought a smaller apartment with a balcony closer to River Talk. He discovered that sleep, like respect, is easier when you earn it. He still wore the lighthouse pin, now dulled at the edges from coat brushing. He looked his age and liked it. He took more walks. He looked at fewer screens. When pressed for a quote, he said, "We're very proud of our benches," which was true on several levels. He visited Avery's grave on a morning with the sky like a new shirt. He brought the lantern, the ridiculous one, and a fresh battery. He set it down and told her about a bridge of hands. He told her about a boy named Prince who had learned to wait before pulling. He told her about an inspector with a daughter who drew buildings on napkins. "We did a thing," he said again, and the wind took it and put it somewhere useful. Loretta had more good days than bad. She taught Zuri to make cornbread that didn't forget its manners. She taught Jamal to iron a shirt without burning ambition into it. She taught everyone the sentence, "No, thank you," said with warmth and a period. When breath failed her, sometimes she sat and let others carry chairs. They were eager to. Zuri grew. Not taller, though, that happened wider in the way that means you hold more world. She won a city scholarship with an essay titled "Rooflines and Kindness" and a portfolio that held bridges that knew they were verbs. She spent a summer interning at an office with glass walls and learned she preferred walls with bulletin boards. She came home to do a fellowship at the Commons as designer in residence, which she translated for children as drawing grown-up permission. Jamal graduated in a shirt that refused to wrinkle and an expression that made Loretta fan herself with a program. He started engineering at a state university and came home on weekends to fix things that pretended to be broken just to see him. The day Lantern Walk was added to the city's tourist map. A guide pointed at it from a boat and said, "Community funded, community designed." Someone in a ball cap asked what that meant. The guide struggled. Then a woman on the deck, an auntie with bracelets like announcements, said, "It means we finally got what we asked for and kept asking." The boat applauded. The river, tired of applause, nonetheless sparkled. 5 years later, the learning commons felt older in the right places, edges softened by hands, floors speaking in squeaks, a dent on the third step where kids jumped the last two and grew up. The statue out front had a new patina and a scratch on the left hand where a skateboard had apologized with paint. The wall of instructions had added 2 more lines. 12. If you forget, ask. 13. If someone remembers for you, say thanks. Fort Hello needed repainting. Children did it, leaving a small corner untouched as an archaeological exhibit labeled first version. The dispatch had a second board labeled blessings and leftovers where people posted, rent covered by cousin. Taking a nap, extra crib, gently judged by my mother. Orange cat seeks window with opinions. The city awarded Zuri a commission, a small, stubborn clinic in Southgate that refused to be scary. She designed windows that looked like laughter and halls that made walkers feel like winners. She put the waiting room in the garden and the intake form on one page. She printed a sign over the door that read, "This place believes you." Her firm, tiny, loud was called Roofs and Hearts. Jamal did the load calculations and pretended not to cry at the ribbonless opening. Mara finally said yes to a new job without resigning from the old one. She took a half-time role at City Hall, special advisor for boring, crucial things. Her first act was to standardize the Commons checklist into city templates with the subheader, "This is how we do not fail people." Her second act was to get the janitors at 3 schools the raises they earned 10 times over. She celebrated with empanadas. Teresita took credit and passed out peppermints. Ruiz got slower. His jokes got shorter and better. He sat on the bridge some evenings and announced to no one, "Look at us." Union the cat sat with him and pretended to understand. Loretta grew into a legend. The kind people whispered thank you to when passing her in the grocery aisle. She insisted she was regular as rice, which did not diminish her power. On a summer morning, she showed Zuri where the important papers were, not because, she said, just in case. Zuri nodded and labeled the folder when the general takes a nap. They did not open it again. At the first Lantern Walk anniversary, the lanterns flickered on as if they were running a victory lap. Zuri stood halfway across, Levi's cuffed, pencil tucked behind one ear like a flag. Graham arrived late because of traffic, because of old bones, because of new joy, and found her where the view was best. "Hey, boss," he said. "Hey, donor," she said. They leaned on the gently widened rail that had saved 6 hips and 2 arguments in its first year. People streamed past them, some locals, some tourists, some just people who liked bridges, each carrying small universes in their coats, their eyes, their steps. Fort Hello was visible 2 blocks away, a rectangle of color and verbs. The commons beyond it, a building the city had learned to trust, hummed like a refrigerator full of someone else's victory. "You good?" Loretta asked, arriving with a cane and a bag of something wrapped in foil. She always arrived with food or a correction. "I'm home," Graham answered, as he always did, and meant it in every tense. Zuri held up the foil. "Cornbread treaty?" She asked. "Accepted," they said in unison. They ate. They watched as the sky did its theater. They let the quiet gather like a choir. "Do you ever think about What if I hadn't asked? Zuri said, voice soft, back at the beginning on purpose. That night, Graham took a breath that measured years. I think about it every time someone crosses, he said. I think about all the corners our lives took because you were brave enough to need. Loretta bumped his hip with the cane, affectionate assault. Need isn't a sin, she said. It's a map. Zuri nodded, committing it to the internal wall where she kept quotes that turned into buildings. Okay, she said. New project. Already? Mara called, appearing from the flow like she'd planned the reveal. She had a clipboard because of course she did. Do we get a week off? 2 days, Zuri negotiated. I want to turn that abandoned lot by the bus depot into a night market. Lanterns, obviously. Soup, poetry, a table where job applications come with a human, a stage for apologies. I'll find the permits, Mara said, as if ordering eggs. Jamal will yell at the drainage. Ruiz will bless the porta potties. Sanctify the sanitation, Ruiz agreed, tipping an imaginary miter. Felix will mop the stars, someone joked.